Welcome to the next installment in my video lecture series in economics. And in this particular video lecture, I'm going to be taking a look at a producer, consumer, and total surplus. And this is important because when we start taking a look at the efficiency of a market and how public policy impacts efficiency in a particular market, we have to understand the concepts of producer, consumer, and total surplus. As always, I like to give appropriate attribution to any information that's contained in here, particularly anything that's in quotes, is from the textbooks that is underlined on this particular slide. As always, there's a few terms that we have to take a look at. Consumer surplus is the difference between the maximum amount a person is willing to pay for a good and its current market price. So for example, if I would have willingly paid $10 for a specific beer and I was able to buy it for $5, I generate consumer surplus of $5, the difference between the maximum I would have willingly spent for that item and what I actually spent for that item. Producer surplus, on the other hand, is the difference between the current market price and the cost of production for the firm. And for our purposes, the graphical analysis, we're going to be using the supply curve as the measure of the cost of production. So to measure consumer surplus, you have to have a demand curve. So we have our downward sloping demand curve as always. And as a reminder, consumer surplus is the difference between the maximum amount a person is willing to pay for a good and its current market price. So we have a particular price here, P0, and we draw in a horizontal line there until we hit the demand curve, and that tells us quantity demanded. And the measure of consumer surplus is the area between price and the demand curve. So that blue shaded area is the consumer surplus, and as I said, the best way to remember this, it's the area that's bounded by price and demand, and that gives us the consumer surplus at a particular price in this particular market. We could do the same thing for producer surplus, but we'll only be looking at the supply curve. So we have our upward sloping supply curve because the law of supply is upward sloping. So we go from price over to the supply curve and down, and that gives us the quantity supplied. And the area that is bounded by price and the supply curve is going to be the area of producer surplus. So again, the easiest way to remember this if you're doing a graphical analysis is the area bounded by price and the supply curve, and that gives you the producer surplus at that price and quantity. Total surplus, on the other hand, is just consumer surplus and producer surplus. So if you add consumer surplus and producer surplus together, you get total surplus. So remember, consumer surplus is the area bounded by price and the demand curve, and producer surplus is the area bounded by price and the supply curve. So we have consumer surplus, the blue shaded area, producer surplus, the red shaded area, and if you add those two areas together, that gives you total surplus in this market.